So, hello. This is Curtis Miller, and I wanted to show off one of the projects that I've been working on. Actually, one of the projects I've been working on specifically over the past week, but also something that I did last year that was the basis of this project. And the project that I'd like to show you is a game that I made in Godot called Ambush from the Depths. But actually, this project is a print and play game that I made last year for Sebastian Bay. So I'm going to be talking about the print and play game as well, the board game. And honestly, the game itself is going to be very quick. So we'll very quickly play the game and see what it is. But then after that, we'll talk a little bit about some of the process that went behind creating this thing. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Let's go ahead and promote this. Okay, so here is, if I can scroll. Yeah, okay. Okay, so here's the game. Ambush from the Depths. And, excuse me. So, we are playing as an attack submarine. This is us over here. The submarine right now is on the side that indicates that it's at deep depth. Our charge is to sink this landing helicopter dock in the middle. We're playing on this map. Each one of these areas on the map are called sectors. And we occupy a sector and can move into adjacent sectors and are going to need to get close enough in order to be able to launch torpedoes and kill this landing helicopter dock. So we're going to move through these sectors, and what we need to do is not be detected on the way. If we get detected too soon, then the landing helicopter dock is going to be, or the LHD, is going to start engaging in maneuvers against us. And the game doesn't actually explore what happens during those maneuvers. It just basically assumes that if you reach that point, then the game is over and you've lost. The whole point of this is to destroy the LHD before it has an opportunity to start responding to your presence. So approach it undetected and then destroy it. So, during our turn, the game randomly picked a starting sector for us, and we're kind of starting off around the rear of this, which is a little unfortunate. We may need to play a little bit of catch-up. When we start out, the first thing we're able to do is change our depth, and I don't really feel like changing my depth right now. What's the significance of changing my depth? Each of these sectors are going to be these little detection boxes, which they're explained in a little bit more. They're discussed a little bit more over here, how to read each of these little squares. Over on the perimeter, we only have squares for the sonar that the LHD is using, and it's using a passive sonar. It's just listening for noise in the water, which we might emit. We are at deep depth, so when the LHD makes a roll to determine whether it can hear us, it's going to roll against this bottom number down here, which in this case is going to be 3. It would need to roll 3 or less on 2 dice in order to be able to detect us. If we went to shallow depth, we would be more detectable. So why would we want to go to shallow depth? Well, the reason why is because once we start getting closer to the LHD, then our torpedoes are also going to have an easier time finding it. So that's one reason why we might want to raise up our depth. That being said, we're not going to start out this game making a depth change. So I'm just going to click this button that says skip depth change. That moves on to the second phase, where we are able to move closer to the LHD, to the submarine. And these flashing sectors are the sectors that we're able to move into. Right now we're moving at slow speed, so we are only able to move 1 space. So we will move over into this one. We'll just go directly closer. After we make our movement, we are eligible to change our speed. And I don't feel like changing my speed at the moment. The options, if we were to click on this, we could stop or we could go fast. If we stop, next turn we're not going to move any spaces. If we go fast, next turn we're going to be able to move 2 spaces. But then we'll be more detectable. You know what? Let's go ahead and switch to fast. All right, so the game rolls, and it made a roll first off for whether the LHD was able to detect us. And we were in this blue sector, blue ring right here, which in this game is called not a convergence zone. And in this area, we're not detectable, right? And which is indicated by the 2 Fs on the detection box. In these pinkish areas, those are convergence zones, in which case we are more easily heard. So it first made a roll for whether it was able to hear us, and it cannot hear us. It automatically failed. And then it made a roll for a maneuver. And it rolled 1 die. If it rolled a 1 or a 6, the LHD would have turned, and that would have moved us relative towards it. This map displays our position relative to the LHD's position, right? So right now we're behind it. If it turned and we were in this sector, if it turned into to the left or towards port, we would have moved from here over to here. If it had turned towards starboard, we would move from here over to here. So we would have moved around it, right? But instead, it just moved forward, in which case our piece was moved over into this sector here, following this arrow. These little arrows on here show where our SSN moves relative to the LHD when the LHD moves forward. Okay, so the LHD moved forward, and that just kind of moved us a little bit more towards being behind it. We don't want to just sit here, by the way, because if we end up moving off the board, like if you were in this sector here, and the LHD moves forward, then we'd lose the game. Right? We need to stay in contact with the thing. So right now, we're going to continue moving towards the LHD. We're now moving fast now. The game's going to ask us if we want to change depth. And I actually will go ahead and change depth. So I'm going to click that. And next turn, we're going to go from deep to shallow water. We're moving fast, so we are moving 2 spaces a turn, but unfortunately, we're also easier to detect. It's going to add +2 to the detection threshold, which makes us easier to detect. That's a bad thing. But we're going to move here and then here. Now, you may be looking at this and thinking, well, we just skipped over a convergence zone, so it's not going to be able to hear us. But actually, he can hear us because at some point we were in a convergence zone, and the game does care about us moving across a convergence zone. It will still give the LHD an opportunity to hear us. I don't want to change my speed, so just going to leave that. 6. All right. So 6 was more than 5, so it didn't hear us. It also did make a turn, right? We originally were here. It rolled a 6, so that caused it to turn towards starboard, and that put us up here. But then when it moves forward, we got pushed over into this sector here. Okay. We're now at shallow depth. I kind of like that. We're going to skip the depth change. We're now able to fire torpedoes now. So we could skip this, but instead what I'm going to do is click on this and fire 2 of my 4 torpedoes. Now when I fire these torpedoes, they're going to start making a whole bunch of noise. They're going to start using active sonar, and the LHD is going to be alerted. Now, we won't lose the game immediately if we fail to sink the LHD. But next turn, since the LHD would start our turn alerted, we would have to kill it by the end of our turn, right? So this is something where once we do this, the timer is going to start ticking on when we're going to be able to, when we actually need to kill this thing. The torpedoes themselves, they're going to start off in our sector. Excuse me. They're going to start off in our sector, and they're going to start at our depth. We're actually starting at shallow, which is a little unfortunate, because at shallow, it's an automatic failure when the torpedo starts pinging and starts listening. But it would first move here, and then it would make a ping. If it fails, it's still going to move into the next sector close to the LHD, and it's going to make another ping. If it misses the second one, then that's just a failure, right? The torpedo has lost contact with the LHD, and it's just going to run off and miss, right? So 2 failures in a row is going to cause it to miss. But if it manages to detect here and fail here, it would actually successfully continue to home onto the LHD. Once it starts homing onto the LHD, it's going to make a roll to actually try and kill it. It needs to roll 4 or less on one die, and if it does, then it will actually get a hit on the LHD, and we need to get 2 hits. So let's fire 2 torpedoes. Let's just go right for it. So failure. Oh no, failure. That was a failure. Success, failure, but that's fine. Rolls to hit. It got 1 of the 2 kills. Okay, so that's good. We will move. We're going to move in front of it. And I'm going to slow down. So it doesn't roll a detection roll anymore because it's already alerted to our presence. It did make a turn. So it turned, I think, towards starboard. Or it did turn towards port. I can't quite remember. Oh, yeah, it turned towards port, which caused us to move this direction. Then it moved forward. Okay, so we're not going to change our depth again. We're going to fire our 2 torpedoes, and we have to kill this time. So let's see. This one, failure, success. Oh, that one failed. Oh, yeah, that's right. We're worse back here. Oh, yeah, we killed it. Yay, we got 2 kills. All right, let's restart and do another one. Okay, so this time we're starting over here. We're not going to change depth. We're going to go forward, not change our speed. Yeah, that's fine. So it doesn't hear us, doesn't turn. Skip. Move forward, that's fine. We might want to start going fast. Yeah, it's a good thing that we went fast. By the way, it doesn't actually care about our speed until the turn where we actually make 2 moves. So now it cares about our speed, and that's when it's going to apply that modifier. So let's see. Do I want to... No, I want to start out at deep. I want to actually shoot at this guy while we're deep. We're not going to change our speed. He still has not hurt us, so that's good. Skip depth change. And now we'll go ahead and go slow. Oh, that's a good thing too. The unfortunate thing about us being so close is that we don't have as many opportunities to roll on this guy. If we had been deep over in this sector, we would have gotten 3 rolls and more opportunities. So that's a little, which I think that's better. That might be better. Yeah, that would have been better because we would have gotten an opportunity to detect here. Here it would have, when the torpedo starts homing in on the LHD in this game, it starts out at your depth and then it goes to shallow because the LHD is on the surface. So I think that's fine. I'm not gonna. Yeah, we'll go. Oh wait, no, we don't want to change our depth because there is a rule that says you can't fire torpedoes when you're changing your depth. So we're gonna skip that part. Now we're gonna fire our torpedoes. I think that's a miss. Yeah, that was also a miss. Oh no. Okay, we got 1 kill. We got 1 kill. That's good. I actually kind of want to be further behind, so I'm going to move there. I'm not going to... Okay, cool. Not going to change our depth. Going to fire the last 2 torpedoes. All right, we win. And I guess this isn't the world's best programmed game. Like, I'm still able to move over here. But yeah, we win. So that's 2 wins. Okay. So that's the gameplay in the nutshell. And this is available on itch. This at some point. This should be the link to the game. And yeah, so that's kind of what I've been working on. So the remainder of this video, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the design of this game. First off, there was a whole bunch of stuff about how to play this. And here's the actual rule set. Let's go ahead and put up this. So here's the actual rule set, which this is kind of in black and white right now. It's in color. But here's the rule set. We've got 4 pages of rules. This is originally a print and play game, which in the file that is included on itch, this includes the rules and also the print and play game. But it includes the rules on how to play the game, so everything that I just described. I didn't really explain how to play the game in that voiceover, but that's fine. All the rules are nicely written out here, and I've also got some design notes about how I made this. A little bit about the history of, let's say, the board game. So I'm going to be posting this video on my YouTube, and if you go back through my YouTube, you'll find a video of me giving a preview of a game that was more of a miniatures game that I made in Vassal. That I made for the IDA microgame project. This is for a different project that was kind of inspired by me showing a guy named Sebastian Bay, who's an analyst at CNA and knows every single wargamer in the world, I guess. Or at least every single professional wargamer. I showed him my IDA microgame, the miniature style game, and it was kind of funny. He started redesigning my game in front of me. And my response to that was like, well, why are you redesigning my game? What's wrong with it? Did I do something wrong? I'm not understanding why you're doing this. And he said there's nothing wrong with it except for the fact that it's not a microgame. Because he has a very specific definition about what a microgame is. And basically a microgame looks something like this. It prints out on one sheet of paper. It includes a map. It has counters that you cut out to go with it. The rule set, similarly, also should be very short and print on one piece of paper, which in this case, it counts because the design notes are not a part of the rules. And if you print this on in booklet printing, so 4 pages per sheet, then it would still fit. So this more closely fits Sebastian's definition of what a microgame is. And he started drawing circles around the LHD, saying some of these circles are going to be conversion zones and some are not. And you kind of are moving through these circles in order to get towards it. So then he tasked me with making this game for a kit that he was going to create for microgames that he would then actually deliver to units or allow units to order from a print and play or a board game self-publisher called Game Crafter. I agreed to make the game with him and made an initial iteration of the game that had a lot of problems and was really complicated because I was having a hard time getting the sectors to work with everything that I wanted to depict in the game. If you look back to my previous video where I show a miniature style game, a miniature style submarine game, the engagement depicted there is more complex, or at least goes further out. In the game that we just played, the game ends when you've been detected. Now that didn't really happen in the playthrough that I had. We didn't lose, but if the LHD had detected us, then a timer starts, and if we don't manage to kill the LHD by that time, then we lose. In the miniatures game, that's not what happens. And also, in addition to that, after we sink the LHD, we actually have a second objective where we need to get away. Right? So in the other game, it's not just sink the LHD, it's sink the LHD and then survive and get away. while you're being hunted down by the LHD's escorts, the destroyers and frigates that are surrounding it, along with the helos that are aboard the LHD or that stuff. All that stuff is going to be hunting you down. So trying to convey that more complex scenario into something this small was very difficult and ended up with a really complicated rule set in order to try and figure out how things are going to be moving. Because in order to depict things on these circles, like that's kind of a weird geometry. I think that the way I did a pretty decent job of it. People rather like it. In order to be showing everything as being around this pivot point where the LHD is, and you're moving around the LHD to represent its relative movement towards you, or your relative position towards it. So getting that logic to work was tricky. And ultimately, I made something for Sebastian. I showed it to him, and then he was like, "Curtis, this is not acceptable for a microgame. This thing, I do not understand this thing. Well, we need to sit down and talk about it." So we sat down one day at Sebastian's apartment and talked through the design and why I designed it the way I had, which was really complicated and just unparsable. And he was like, and he basically started stripping stuff out of the engagement that we were going to depict, and so that it basically became just the approach, and also we're ignoring the fact that there's stuff around this LHD, right? It's just sitting alone. Don't ask too many questions why. Presumably, I would say what's probably going on is that other stuff you're just ignoring it, right? So it greatly simplified the situation so that we could have something that kind of works. It was the most eye-opening part of that discussion actually was, or the part that actually kind of fixed things and allowed me to reach the point where I was able to design this, was when I basically said to Sebastian, I don't think the game that you're asking me to design is very interesting. It's going to be something where they just kind of they solve this problem in maybe 5 or 10 minutes and then it's done. He said, yeah, it's fine. That was his reaction. He was like, yeah, that's fine. It's a microgame. It's a little thing that they'll do in a classroom. They'll play it for 5 or 10 minutes and then they'll toss it. That's what I want. I was like, oh, okay, if that's what you want, then I can design that. and then I designed this. And I will say, I did some play tests with this game. And I thought this game was super simple. And I still think it's super simple. I mean, admittedly, there's a lot of stuff to explain about the movement around this map, the arrows, how the arrows work, some of the intricacies about when you're able to fire torpedoes, you can't fire torpedoes when there's a marker in the depth change box, or some of the stuff like that. But in comparison to some of the other stuff that I made, I found it to be a fairly simple thing. Right? There's not too many interesting decisions to make here. That being said, when I actually had people play it, I was surprised with how challenging they found it to be. And that was kind of an eye-opening moment for myself. How someone else who was less familiar with this kind of topic, how it was actually rather challenging and intriguing to them. So that was pretty cool. I designed the game. I designed this. I'm not really sure what to do with this game system, but I do feel like I made some neat, slick decisions about how to handle the LHD turning, where when it turns, you move relative to it, right? Because it's in the middle there. And when it moves forward, these little arrows that tell you where you move relative to it as it moves forward. I think that's pretty neat. And when I show it to some of my friends in the area, they think it's pretty neat too. It was like that was a neat way to kind of solve that problem. The colored arrows that I use to it's like when you turn, you move from a matching color to another matching color, either clockwise or counterclockwise, depending on where the LHD turned. I I remember figuring that coming up with that idea and being like pretty proud of myself. And also, I will say I am very happy with how it looks. The counters, the counter design. There's an old war game designer named Simon Redmondson who basically said he wants your counter should be super simple. Keep this stuff super simple. And these look like the kind of counters that I think Rem and Simonson would design. Um, they're simple, plain. It's like this is an SSN, and it tells you just the information that you need to know about that counter, and also the color scheme. I personally love the colors. So I remember when I made this thing, even though I think this isn't like the best thing I've ever designed. Um, Not that I've designed really great stuff, but even though I thought this was one of the simplest designs and one of the games with the least replayability that I've ever made, I was like, but it looks so good. It makes me happy. So yeah, there's unfortunately some issues with this game's depiction of undersea warfare. I showed it to some of the folks at work, and I say in these design notes pretty early on that I was a little bit nervous about making stuff like this because I'm not going to ask permission from someone of whether I can publish this game or not. I'm just going to post it online. But in order for me to feel safe in doing that, kind of felt like I should just not look up any real parameters or even look up at like what Wikipedia says the range of a torpedo is, because I don't want there to be any questions about whether I said something that I shouldn't say. Unfortunately, that resulted in some things being shown where you show it to someone who actually knows about how undersea warfare works, and they're like, "That's not right at all. That's not even close to right." So, and I talk about it in these design notes. Basically, say what are appropriate lessons that you can take away, and what are, and yeah. So, what are things that you can actually learn from this? In particular, the convergence zone stuff. Convergence zones are happening at ranges that are not relevant to the situation being depicted here. I mean, I guess out here that's fine, but having the torpedo be fired in ranges where convergence zones are relevant, people looked at that with skepticism. Like that seemed like a strange situation. So that was unfortunate. But also in addition to that, I didn't really want to take it out because I thought that it made the game interesting. I thought it was like having these things there and this thing that you have to mess around with as players and be aware of. I thought that was something that made the game more fun, so I also didn't want to take it out. So yeah, but oh well. I think the thing ended up being fun anyway. I was also pretty pleased with how I made these rules because I made them using LaTeX and was able to take advantage of LaTeX's ability to extensively cross-reference stuff, and easily import images and just include them. And if I change the image, like changing these diagrams that I created, if I change those, it can automatically regenerate the document so that it's using the correct images. I mention this because I know that so many people who make rulebooks are not using LaTeX. They're probably using freaking Word or something like that. I know for a fact that they're using Word. And that just makes your life so hard. Like you could be using LaTeX instead and your life would be easier. It would do all the cross-referencing for you. Like the reason why these rules are so long is because I cross-reference extensively so that if you have a question, you only need to look in one place to basically answer that question, right? You don't have to go hunting around the book despite the fact that there are tons of cross-references all over the place. But the cross-references are mostly just so that you know where to go find information if you need to understand a concept further. Like I put a lot of thought into how to design this rulebook to make it easy to both learn quickly and identify quickly information that you need, which is why certain sentences are bolded, and those sentences are supposed to be sentences where that sentence probably answers the question that you're going to ask right now when you go look to that rule. And if there's one sentence from this rule that I want you to remember, that sentence is bolded, right? So there's that aspect of it. In fact, I almost suspect you could make a very short rule book from this by using just the bolded sentence. And also with LaTeX, you could probably set things up so that it just automatically creates this abbreviated rule book for you. Or you don't even need to do anything. You just have to tell it to please make this rule book. Show only things that are bolded and exclude anything that isn't. But in addition to that, the cross-referencing is done in such a way to try and make it so that someone can very easily find information. And I try to make the rulebook redundant so that it's easy to find information that you need. So even though the rulebook is really short for the game that I made, like that game took 5 minutes. Like this feels really excessive for a 5-minute game. But I mostly wanted to practice the technique of writing a rulebook like this. And thinking about how to design a rulebook in such a way that information is easy to find and also it's easy to figure out how it is you're supposed to learn the game. Yeah. So I think that's about it for speaking about the game itself. A lot of the machinery, including the research, the intellectual machinery that went into this game, like detectability and convergent zones and all that stuff, you can watch my previous video on making of my miniature style game, because I basically just used all of the math and all the simulations and numbers that I used for that game and just made it for this one too. Right. So there's that. That's about all I want to say about the board game. I would like to say a little bit something about making this in Godot. I don't want to show that. So, and let's go ahead and there we go. So this is Godot, the Godot game engine, which is something that I've been playing around with for the past few years and have done some game jams in. Made like 5 games for game jams, screwing around. Or maybe 6 at this point. There's one game that I actually made for a work codeathon that nobody can see because it's now on a work computer. And I don't know that Ida wants to show it to people. But I've been making a number of games with this, and in the spring of this year was Ludum Dare 57, a game jam, and the theme for that game jam was depths. So I thought, you know what? Let's make like a 5th or 6th submarine game, but actually let's just make it a port of this board game that I wrote, which arguably is against the spirit of Ludum Dare, because you're supposed to make a brand new game in 3 days. And as should be clear from the discussion I just had, the game design itself I designed this game over several months with lots of discussion with others and had lots of playtesting. So the game design itself is far from new, right? This is a game design that had been tested a bit. But I also don't care. I don't care if Ludum Dare were to disqualify me or something. It's there's no way I'm going to win that anyway. Right? 3,000 or 4,000 games show up, and some of them are in teams with people who are probably in college at this point, have tons of time on their hands. They don't have a job. They can work in teams. They actually are willing to stay up for 14 hours a day making a game, whereas I kind of just don't have the patience for that. These days, my game design is I'll spend an hour or 2 in the evening, every evening, and maybe 4 hours on each day of the weekends in order to make something. And yeah, so there's no way I'm going to win Ludum Dare. And I've also been participating in the GMTK game jams or the Brackies game jams, and I don't get anywhere close to the top. So I don't care if I win. I didn't end up making this game for Ludum Dare because I didn't make anything for Ludum Dare because I was a little burned out. I had already made a couple games for 2 other game jams, the Brackies game jam 2025.1 and the a 70RL game jam this year. I was just feeling a little burnt out. But these past few weekends, I decided, you know what? Let's make this board game implementation, this computer game implementation of my board game, with the thought of, would I have been able to make this in the time span of the Ludendare game jam? And not the Ludendare Extra, which actually lasts for 3 weeks, but the regular Ludendare that lasts for 3 days. The answer is a clear no, or at least not with my current patterns. There's no way I would have made this game in that amount of time. Because one of my other objectives in this is trying to figure out what it takes to make board games in Godot. And what are some, because I like board games. I like war games in particular, and I do think that there might be an underexploited opportunity to just use Godot and do game dev where all you're doing is taking board games that people like and then making digital versions of those, right? Maybe with AIs and stuff like that. I think that could possibly be a lucrative business. So I was curious about what it would take in order to make a board game in Godot, and I thought that this game was a fairly simple one and thus good practice. And it definitely was good practice, because it turns out it is not simple to make this thing in Godot. There were some pretty serious challenges. Now, this video is not going to talk about how to make games in Godot, because that's a huge topic. And there's other people who are going to be better introductions on how to make games in Godot. I do care a bit about the professional wargaming community and do think that there's potentially opportunity for that community to be making games with Unity or Godot or whatever to meet potential sponsor needs, but also at the same time recognize that making games on computers is rather challenging. And I immediately encountered a challenge when trying to turn this game, which was already designed, into a digital implementation. With the first challenge being, how am I going to get the map into Godot and represent the map? Let's turn off this thing right here. So I see this map, and I want this to be in the game. There's a lot of reasons why it needs to be in the game. It's a big part of the SSN, the counter moving around and knowing whether it can be detected or not, and the thresholds and where it's going to be moving and all this stuff. It's an extremely important part of the game. And the counters themselves were pretty easy too. That was easy, like making the counters and even giving them mechanics where you could flip counters and have them go to certain faces, and that was pretty cool. But the game board itself was a huge challenge, technically, for me, who isn't very experienced at this stuff. The first challenge is, how do I actually make this efficiently without me manually drawing all these sectors? Now, there are some tutorials online specifically targeted for, let's call them map games, like Europa Universalis 4, if you wanted to make an EU4 or HOI4 style game. There's some tutorials about how you can get data from map making software called QGIS and then translate that into something that works in Godot. And I ended up using that tutorial, maybe I'll link to it in this video, in order to be able to get this to work. But that required a lot of effort on my part in order to get exports from Inkscape, where this map was originally created. So get the data exported into CSVs in a way that could be understood, and then do a batch import in Godot of those CSVs to create the polygons that you see here. In addition to making the polygons, you need to make not just the polygons, but also you need to make the collision shapes, the collision polygons associated with these. Like, here's one of these things. We have an area node, we have a polygon visualization, and we also have a collision shape shown underneath for telling the game that the game needs in order for like knowing whether the submarine is in the polygon or not, or whether your mouse is in the polygon or not. And also this right here is a custom object that I want Godot in order to import and create a bunch of these automatically, because there's a lot of these sectors. And also I will admit, you've probably heard me earlier talking about this. I'm curious about how you can make more general board games in Godot. I am thinking in the back of my mind about how this is going to scale, right? Because it would be interesting to be able to do more of this. Turns out this is what I just described as a full day job, maybe more than that, because none of those tools have easy things to do this process. I ended up having to learn how to extend Godot in order to make a utility, an add-on. Let's see if we can actually open it up. Actually, not an add-on. It's called a plugin. Yeah, instantiate polys. Yeah, I ended up having to learn how to create this thing in order to be able to do the process of... I want this to go away. Go away, you. In order to do that process of importing the map, just the map, into Godot. Then there's the issue of connecting sectors together, which was a full week's worth of work and required an initial guess as to how to do it. And then me throwing that guess away and trying something else that results in all these color circles all over the place. So here's the issue. I need to encode not just that some sectors are adjacent to others, and we have some issues right here of irregularities where, like, when you move inwards, these two are connected to this, and this is connected to these two. Each of these, like this one, however, only has 4 neighbors. But this one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 neighbors. And also this sector needs to know that both of these sectors are outwards of this sector right here. This one is inwards, right? So it needs to know direction, like what sector's to the left, which one's to the right, because I care about that kind of orientation. I care about things being inwards versus outwards, and being also able to handle having multiple sectors being outwards of this. Okay. So that was not easy at all. Initially, I created... So this is hard-coded into the game that a sector has neighbors in these positions, and then you just need to tell the sector where its neighbors are and what other sectors are its neighbors. But unfortunately, Godot does not have any sort of easy capability where I can click on a sector, like I click on this one, and then say, okay, I click on this one, I want to assign something to be to the right of this sector, and then I just click on this one. No, that's not possible. Not in Godot, not in the version of Godot that I have. I would probably have to write an extension, and I don't even know how I would. I basically initially was having to click on a sector and then click on another sector and see, okay, so 5 is connected to 4 on the right, and then I have to go over here and manually click on 4 and hope that I remembered the right one. And it's also not just like which one's left, right, in, out. There's also which one would I move to if the LHD were to turn, or which one do I move to when the LHD moves forward. So there's a lot of information that needs to be encoded in these sectors. And initially I had to do a whole bunch of hand jamming that also probably would have been... Like, I was perfectly willing to throw away my hand jam results even after 2 days of manually specifying which one's to the left, which one's to the right, and looking it up by, like, searching through this list of 66 sectors. Is it 66? 68. 68 sectors. I was willing to do that. But then I was willing to do all the work that I had done on that and then just toss it, because that's also not a safe way to create these. It's super error prone. What I ended up doing instead was creating this little doodad right here called a connector. So where a connector, if we open it up in the editor, We have a connector that has legs. These are the legs. There is a to and a from, and there is metadata that says whether it's that also says whether this is, for example, like this is a feeler, and the feeler has an owner, and also this is a dictionary. This is an in-out connector. Something somewhere indicates that that this is an inwards-outwards relationship, or a clockwise counterclockwise relationship, or an LHD rotation clockwise, LHD rotation counterclockwise relationship, right? To try and then indicate to the game where these connections are, and then when the game starts, these sectors all look to see if there are any of these connectors within them, and if it finds connectors within them, it then uses those connectors to figure out where its neighbors are. That was a slicker way to do things, and also took quite a bit of effort to figure out how to code that up. Like here's the code for connectors, and here's the code for feelers, and also the map zones themselves have a lot of really ugly code. This code right here, this needs to be. It's not one of my proudest moments. This find neighbors code that is being used to figure out like what is connected to what. So yeah, that took like a whole week to figure out how to convey the idea of sectors being neighbors, which is just grand. Yeah, I mean, this map actually has, like, if it were a grid, this would be a lot easier because I could just program a grid. But because it's not a grid, and it has a whole bunch of interesting relationships, that actually ends up being a lot of work for programming. That was by far the hardest aspect of trying to program this. In fact, I almost think that nothing else deserves mention, right? Because that was so hard. It's also unfortunate there's that I basically had to create also centers for these sectors manually and then just put them in the middle. I know that there's code out there and algorithms to algorithmically figure out where the center of some polygon is. I just was not willing to program that, and maybe in the future I will. Maybe in the future I will make an extension that will, or some code of some sort that figures out the center of a polygon. But for now, I was perfectly willing to just drop a center in the middle, and the polygons ask, is there a center in me? And then once they find one, they just then do the appropriate code that identifies the center. Everything else in comparison to like the setting up of the map was relatively easy. Like honestly, the second most challenging part is how I was implementing game turns. And for game turns, I have a state chart. And I'm not sure that I'm implementing the state chart particularly well. I still have a hard time figuring out the appropriate way to use state charts while also respecting some Godot and object-oriented programming conventions regarding hierarchy and composition. And in particular, the call down, signal up convention that is meant to make that is supposed to help structure code. I'm not sure that I am really following those conventions particularly well, but I was able to learn something from it. So I think that's pretty much all I have to say regarding the creation of the digital implementation. All told, I think the digital implementation took about 3 weeks to create. It was much longer than I expected it to be, with the biggest headache by far being the creation of the map. The other parts of it were not so bad, but also at the same time, there wasn't really anything that that just happened, that would miraculously just happened. It took effort, and like I think I was able to reach a point where, like, in an hour or two in an evening, I was able to implement one relatively simple system at a time, and then go to bed at 3 a.m. But or in the morning, but yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to show off a neat thing that I created, and talk a little bit about the challenges. I think that someone perhaps who is if you're a Godot game developer, you may learn something from my experience with the map creation, and I probably should flesh out the system better and make something where I can bake connections so that the game, when it loads up, doesn't do all the connecting. It on, like, I click a button in the editor that bakes all the connections and then puts it into the scene tree. But yeah. Well, that ends my rambling. If you watched for this long, thank you for. I hope you got something out of this and enjoyed listening to me talking about how to create this. And yeah, have a good day. I will see you later.